When history begins to rhyme, it rarely does so quietly. For decades, the world's great powers have maneuvered in tension, in diplomacy, in economics, and increasingly in preparation for war. The alliances that once guaranteed peace are now the very lines dividing it. The phrase World War III has moved from fiction to speculation, and from speculation to quiet planning inside ministries and embassies across the globe. But as the drums of confrontation grow louder, one question rises above all others. If global conflict breaks out, where would it still be safe? To answer that, we must first understand what safe truly means in the context of modern warfare. In the nuclear age, distance no longer guarantees protection. Geography, neutrality, and even wealth can only delay the storm, not prevent it. The safest nations are not those with the biggest armies or tallest walls. They are those most likely to stay out of the line of fire altogether. As tensions rise between major blocs, NATO on one side, China and Russia on another, the world's fault lines begin to resemble those of a century ago, only now laced with intercontinental missiles and globalized economies. In such a scenario, no nation is truly untouched. But some are poised by policy or position to endure the chaos better than others. Small, stable countries with limited strategic value, strong diplomacy, and self-sufficient resources stand the best chance of survival. Islands far from major power centers. Neutral nations with no incentive to join alliances. Economies resilient enough to operate even when global trade collapses. In this documentary, we will explore the 5 key traits that make a country safe in a global war and the specific nations that meet them. From the remote mountains of the southern hemisphere to the icy frontiers of the north, we'll examine who might endure when the rest of the world burns. Before naming them, however, we must look at the foundation of safety itself, the defining factors that separate survivable from vulnerable. Because in a conflict where missiles travel faster than thought, the margin between safety and catastrophe may come down to geography, governance, and luck. Throughout history, geography has been humanity's oldest form of defense. In World War III, it may once again decide who survives and who does not. When intercontinental weapons can cross oceans in minutes, distance alone is not enough. But strategic distance, the kind that removes a nation from the logic of first strikes, remains priceless. The first layer of safety comes from isolation from major power blocs. Countries like New Zealand, Iceland, and Chile occupy unique geographic positions, far removed from major military theaters, with natural barriers of oceans and mountains. In the first hours of a global war, when primary targets include command centers, ports, missile silos, and population hubs, these nations would likely remain outside the initial wave of destruction. New Zealand, for instance, sits more than 2,000 kilometers from its nearest large neighbor, Australia. It holds no nuclear arsenal, no significant military bases of foreign powers, and no enemies. Its agricultural self-sufficiency and maritime borders make it a natural refuge, as long as global fallout patterns remain favorable. Iceland, perched in the North Atlantic, shares similar advantages. Though it is a NATO member, it has no standing army and limited strategic targets. Its remoteness, renewable energy supply from geothermal power, and small population make it resilient, though its alliance ties could complicate neutrality. Even South America, long detached from direct participation in the world's major wars, may once again become a relative sanctuary. Nations like Uruguay and Argentina, distant from global military flashpoints, could avoid direct strikes simply because they offer no immediate tactical gain. In contrast, geographic proximity to conflict zones defines vulnerability. Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East are packed with critical infrastructure and nuclear targets. In these regions, no border is wide enough and no bunker deep enough to guarantee survival. The paradox of modern geography is this: the farther a country is from the centers of power, the closer it is to safety. In a war of nations, being small, distant, and overlooked may be the greatest protection of all. If geography forms the walls of safety, neutrality forms the locks on its gates. In the machinery of global conflict, neutrality is both strategy and art, the ability to remain invisible on the radar of empires. Few countries have mastered it as completely as Switzerland. For centuries, it has avoided entanglement in global wars through a delicate balance of diplomacy, deterrence, and defense. Its terrain helps, mountainous, easily defended, but its true strength lies in political design. Switzerland's armed neutrality, combined with decades of humanitarian diplomacy and global banking networks, ensures that almost every power has more to gain from its stability than from its destruction. Similarly, Sweden, Finland, and Austria have built identities around non-alignment, though their recent security pacts reflect changing realities. Neutrality today is less a declaration than a negotiation, a constant balancing act between global expectations and national interest. Beyond Europe, nations like Singapore and Bhutan represent modern neutrality in other forms. Singapore, despite its size, positions itself as a trade hub open to all, Western and Eastern blocs alike. It avoids confrontation by emphasizing commerce and pragmatism. Bhutan, high in the Himalayas, adopts a neutrality rooted not in policy but philosophy, the principle of gross national happiness, and a near total absence of military ambition. True neutrality in a global conflict is rare, perhaps even impossible. When nations choose sides, neutrality can be seen as defiance. Yet history shows that even in world wars, some countries survive untouched, not because of power, but because of irrelevance to aggression. Neutral nations are not threats, and in the calculus of total war, threats are what attract missiles. In the next part, we'll look beyond maps and policies, at the deeper layer of survival, the economic and resource independence that determines which nations can endure when global trade, fuel, and food networks collapse. In a global war, bombs are only the opening act. The real test of survival begins when supply lines collapse, supermarkets empty in hours, fuel stops flowing, digital transactions freeze. The countries that remain stable are not those with the largest economies, but those that can stand alone. Economic resilience begins with food, fuel, and energy independence, the three elements that separate nations capable of self-sustainment from those dependent on foreign trade. In this metric, few countries rank higher than Australia and New Zealand. Both possess vast agricultural capacity, temperate climates, and access to renewable energy. Australia's landmass holds untapped resources of coal, gas, and uranium, while New Zealand's geothermal and hydroelectric grids can operate without foreign imports. In a world where shipping lanes become battle zones, self-reliant islands have an enormous advantage. Their ports can close, their people can still eat. Contrast that with industrial nations of the Northern Hemisphere, where entire populations depend on food shipped from continents away. When trade collapses, prosperity vanishes overnight. Energy defines endurance. Countries such as Iceland, Norway, and Canada command immense natural reserves, geothermal, hydro, or fossil fuels that can keep lights on when global supply chains fail. But energy without governance breeds chaos. True resilience requires competent, trusted institutions, governments that can ration resources fairly, and maintain public order. History shows that Social cohesion can be as critical as steel and oil. Another hidden fortress is infrastructure redundancy. Switzerland's civil defense system, for example, mandates shelter space for every citizen. Its tunnels, reserves, and communication networks are built to survive isolation. The same principle applies in Finland, where decades of Cold War preparation have left underground cities stocked with food and water for months. These are the nations most likely to remain functional after the first global shock. Not because they are untouched, but because they are organized. When the global market collapses into silence, organization is oxygen. The world will divide into two kinds of countries, those that wait for aid and those that become their own aid. Beyond politics and economics lies a quieter form of safety, geographical sanctuary combined with social stability. A handful of nations meet this rare balance, remote enough to avoid strikes, self-sufficient enough to endure, and stable enough to remain humane when others descended to fear. At the top of nearly every assessment sits New Zealand. Its isolation, low population density, clean water, and agriculture make it the world's default lifeboat. It has no major enemies, no nuclear plants, and minimal reliance on imports. Its greatest vulnerability may be its small size. The question of whether it could absorb a flood of refugees seeking safety once chaos spreads north. Switzerland remains Europe's mountain vault. Surrounded yet independent, armed yet diplomatic, it has survived 2 world wars without a single bomb. Its terrain funnels access through narrow passes, and its population is trained quietly for civil defense. Iceland, remote and energy-rich, offers a cold refuge amid northern seas. Its geothermal systems provide near-limitless heat and power, and its small society is cohesive, pragmatic, and disciplined. Further south, Chile emerges as an underrated sanctuary. Stretching between the Andes and the Pacific, it is both agriculturally capable and strategically irrelevant to global warfare. Its long coastline and mountain barrier form a natural shield from neighboring instability. And across the Pacific, Australia stands as the last continental refuge. Vast, resource-rich, and democratic, its challenge would be isolationism, whether it could sever ties to foreign entanglements fast enough to avoid becoming a base for other powers. No nation is truly invincible. Atmospheric fallout, cyber disruption, and economic contagion cross borders invisibly. But in a world unraveling under fire, safety becomes relative, measured in degrees of danger, not in absolutes. The safest countries in World War III will not be those untouched by crisis, but those prepared to remain civil amid collapse, where governments retain legitimacy, where food still grows, where the radio still speaks truth instead of silence. In the end, the search for safety is not only about geography or politics. It is about the kind of societies we build before the sirens ever sound. Because the true frontier of survival is not the border. It is the human capacity to organize, cooperate, and endure. As history turns its next page, the map may change. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of the earth, a few nations, calm, distant, steady, will remind us that even in the age of total war, peace can still have an address.